Excuse me, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The Boeing 747 shuddered like a fragile toy tossed in the hands of an angry storm. Overhead, bins rattled, oxygen masks swung violently, and the deafening roar of thunder drowned out the panicked prayers of passengers clutching their seats. Children cried, adults shouted over one another, and phones lit up as trembling fingers typed what might be their last messages. The cabin lights flickered, casting shadows across faces frozen in terror. Suddenly, the intercom crackled alive, the voice of the young co-pilot breaking through, uneven and desperate. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a critical emergency. The captain is unconscious. Please, if there is any fighter pilot on board, I beg you, identify yourself immediately." His voice cracked on the last word, raw with fear, as the aircraft pitched downward before leveling again. All eyes darted wildly across the cabin, searching for some miracle. Businessmen in suits clutched armrests, mothers shielded children. A priest whispered a prayer too quickly to follow. Yet, in row 23C, a woman remained motionless. Her head leaned gently against the window, as if oblivious to the chaos tearing through the sky. Her natural curls tied back in a plain ponytail, jeans and a simple blouse making her blend into the background, she looked like any ordinary traveler. No one even considered her. From first class, a tall man with polished shoes and an expensive watch shot to his feet, his voice booming with forced confidence. "I can help," he declared, puffing out his chest. "I've flown dozens of times with my brother-in-law. He's a private pilot. I know what I'm doing." A few passengers clung to his words like a lifeline, but a flight attendant rushed forward, panic still on her face. "Sir, this requires military training. Civilian experience won't be enough in these conditions." The plane jolted again, sending drinks crashing to the floor, and a scream rippled through the cabin. The co-pilot's trembling voice returned, this time pleading. "Please, anyone with combat aviation training, this is our last chance." For a moment, silence reigned. Then, almost imperceptibly, the woman in row 23C stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, her gaze sharp and steady as if the storm itself had called her awake. She sat upright, her breathing calm while panic consumed those around her. No one noticed yet, but the moment they did, everything on that plane would change. The screen cuts to black. Bold white letters flash. "Black woman slept on the plane," until the captain asked. Terrified, "Any fighter pilot on board?" The storm clawed at the plane with relentless fury, but in the center of the chaos sat Keisha Washington, quiet and unnoticed. Her seat in row 23C looked no different from the dozens around it, yet the woman herself carried a presence that didn't fit the role others assigned her. She wore a faded pair of jeans and a plain blouse, the kind of outfit chosen for comfort, not impression. Her carry-on tucked neatly under the seat. No flashy jewelry, no makeup meant to draw attention. If anything, she blended seamlessly into the blur of frightened passengers. But behind her, still eyes rested years of discipline, missions that had taught her to sleep through explosions and wake at the sound of danger. The chaos rattling through the cabin didn't shake her as it did the others. While mothers clutched their children and businessmen sweated through their ties, Kesha inhaled slowly, her breaths measured, her gaze steady. To anyone watching, she was simply another black woman traveling alone, returning home from work or visiting family. No one imagined she carried secrets greater than the storm outside. First class, however, was another world entirely. There, Richard Blackwood paced between his leather recliner and the polished bar. His tailored suit clung to him like a badge of power, the glint of his imported glasses catching each flicker of lightning. He thrived on being seen, by his wife seated beside him, by the flight attendants who winced at his barked orders, by the nervous passengers who glanced up, half hoping his confidence was real. "Nobody back there in economy is going to save us," he sneered loud enough for several rows to hear. "If anyone has the skill, it'll be someone who can afford to sit up here." He tapped his chest, as if the rows of plush leather and champagne service confirmed his importance. The whispers started almost instantly. A young couple leaned together, voices low but cutting. "She doesn't look like a pilot." Another passenger shook her head, disbelief etched across her face. "Too young. Too ordinary. Look at her clothes." The judgment floated through the cabin like poison, unspoken but felt, prejudice dressed as a casual assumption. Kesha heard it all, though she gave no sign. Her calm expression didn't waver. Her hands remained folded neatly in her lap. She had been here before, in rooms where she was doubted before she even spoke, in missions where her authority was questioned before she proved herself 10 times over. To her, the disbelief was almost familiar, like background noise she had long since learned to tune out. Richard thrived on that doubt. Each second the storm grew worse, his voice grew louder, feeding off the panic. "Trust me," he insisted to anyone who would listen. "I've flown in private jets across Europe. I know the procedures. That girl back there? She's not going to help you." His arrogance hung heavy in the air, filling the void of leadership with empty words. Meanwhile, Kesha closed her eyes for just a moment, letting the turbulence roll through her body like a wave she had already mastered. In her silence was strength, a contrast so sharp it made the surrounding noise seem desperate. While fear spread from row to row, she embodied something the passengers couldn't yet see, an anchor in the middle of a storm, and though none of them realized it yet, the quiet woman in row 23C carried the only chance they had of surviving. The cabin lurched again as a violent gust threw the aircraft sideways. Overhead compartments burst open, bags tumbling into the aisle. A child screamed, a glass shattered, and the oxygen masks swung like pendulums. The intercom crackled to life once more, the co-pilot's voice breaking with desperation. "I can't fly this alone. The captain is unconscious. Please, if anyone has military aviation experience, we need you now." His words shook as much as the aircraft itself, and for a split second, silence fell. A collective realization that 300 lives hung by a thread. Richard Blackwood wasted no time. He shoved past a trembling flight attendant, his voice booming with false authority. "Listen here. My brother-in-law is a private pilot. I've flown alongside him dozens of times. I know the procedures. Let me in that cockpit." His wife tugged nervously at his sleeve, but he brushed her hand away, chest puffed out as if money itself could steady the storm. The flight attendant shook her head firmly. "Sir, this isn't a private jet over sunny skies. We're in a Category 5 storm. We need military-level expertise." Richard's face reddened. "Are you doubting me? I paid $15,000 for these seats. I have more experience than anyone back here in coach." His words dripped with arrogance, and a few passengers nodded weakly, desperate for someone, anyone, to take control. But in row 23C, a different presence stirred. Kesha Washington rose slowly, her movements deliberate, steady. While others stumbled in the turbulence, she stood tall, balanced as though the storm respected her footing. The cabin fell into uneasy silence, eyes following her as she stepped into the aisle. Her voice, calm and unshaken, cut through the chaos. "Excuse me?" She moved past Richard, who glared at her as though she were an intruder trespassing on his stage. She faced the flight attendant directly. "Colonel Kesha Washington, United States Air Force. Call sign, Spectre. 500 flight hours in F-22 Raptors. Expert in navigation under extreme conditions." The words landed like thunder. Gasps rippled through the passengers. A woman covered her mouth. A man muttered, "She's joking," while another whispered, "Did she just say Air Force?" All eyes locked on the unassuming woman who moments before had been invisible. Richard laughed bitterly, a sharp sound that cut across the stunned quiet. "You've got to be kidding me. Her?" He gestured dismissively at Kesha. "She's lying. Look at her. No credentials, no uniform. You really want to hand over the controls of a jumbo jet to this?" His tone dripped with disdain, the prejudice so naked it silenced even those who might have agreed with him moments before. Kesha didn't flinch. She met his sneer with steady eyes and, without hesitation, began to recite. Emergency procedure for loss of pressurization at cruising altitude. Immediate oxygen deployment. Emergency descent to 10,000 feet. Angle not exceeding 15 degrees to avoid structural stress. Communication code with air traffic control, 7700. Her voice continued, precise, unwavering, listing procedure after procedure, technical, exact, second nature. She spoke not as someone recalling notes, but as someone who had lived these moments in cockpits high above hostile territory. The cabin froze. Richard's smirk faltered, replaced by the uncomfortable silence of a man cornered by facts. The passengers exchanged glances, disbelief melting into awe. The whispers returned, but they were different now. She really knows this. She sounds official. What if she's telling the truth? The co-pilot's voice came again, weaker now, almost begging. Please, we can't hold this course much longer. Someone must step forward. Kesha's calm gaze swept the room. Her composure was unshakable, her tone resolute, and yet doubt still lingered in the air, thick as the storm pressing against the windows. Richard crossed his arms, voice sharp. Words mean nothing. Until I see credentials, I won't trust her with my life, or my family's. The turbulence rattled the plane once more, screams breaking out, the fuselage groaning under the storm's pressure. The question hung heavy in the air. Would they believe the quiet woman from row 23C, or put their lives in the hands of arrogance and fear? The cabin held its breath, balanced on the edge of a decision that could mean salvation or disaster. The cockpit was a battlefield of alarms and flashing red lights. Warning tones overlapped with the violent shake of turbulence, and rain pounded the windshield so hard it looked like the ocean itself was trying to claw its way inside. Captain Mitchell slumped in his seat, his body jerking violently, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. His hands twitched uselessly over the controls as the aircraft dipped, pulling gasps and screams from the cabin behind the reinforced door. Co-pilot James Wilson sat frozen, his face pale and drenched with sweat. His hands hovered above the yoke, trembling. I can't, he stammered, his breath shallow. I've never, this storm, without the captain, His voice cracked, fear turning his training to dust. Kesha Washington stepped forward without hesitation. Move. The word wasn't shouted, but its calm command cut through the chaos like a blade. She slid into the captain's chair, her hands steady as they closed around the trembling controls. Her voice was sharp and precise. Altitude, airspeed, crosswinds. James blinked at her, startled, but his mouth moved automatically, rattling off the numbers. Kesha adjusted dials with fluid precision, easing the aircraft out of its death dive into a tenuous level flight. Stabilize, don't fight it, she murmured, as though speaking directly to the aircraft itself. Respect the storm, and it will give you a corridor. A fresh alarm screamed from the medical monitor strapped to Captain Mitchell's arm. His pulse was erratic, heart rate spiking. Kesha reached across with one hand, checking his airway, rolling him slightly to ease his breathing. She barked over her shoulder. I need a medic up here, now! Even as her fingers pressed for vitals, her other hand held the yoke steady, guiding 300 tons of metal through winds that could tear it apart. The cockpit door banged open. Richard Blackwood shoved his way in, his face red, his tie loose, his arrogance spilling like poison. This is madness, he roared, pointing a finger at Kesha. She doesn't belong here. She's dangerous, a pretender. You're letting a woman in economy class experiment with our lives. Kesha didn't even turn to look at him. Mr. Blackwood stepped back. This is no place for tourists. Her voice was iron, unshaken by his theatrics. Richard's face twisted in fury. I will not stand by while you kill us all with your charade. I demand to speak to air traffic control. I demand... The cabin door cracked open again, and a woman in a lab coat hurried in, clutching a small medical kit. Her voice was calm but firm. Dr. Patricia Chun, neurosurgery, Johns Hopkins. I heard the call for a medic. I have experience treating pilots with neurological injuries. She knelt immediately by the captain, checking his pupils, attaching sensors, her practiced movement steady under pressure. She looked up, meeting Keisha's eyes. Colonel Washington? Kesha gave a single nod, still guiding the plane through the storm. Dr. Chun's expression shifted from curiosity to recognition. I've worked in military hospitals. I know your record. You're the one who brought in pilots nobody thought would live. The validation landed with weight, and even James felt the chill of awe ripple through him. Richard, however, barked a bitter laugh. Oh, wonderful. Now the imposter has a fan club. What next? Should we let her land us on a highway? James's nerves were shredded, his training warring with the instinct to obey. Colonel, he stammered, with all respect, this goes against all safety protocols. Standard procedure is to divert, maintain altitude, wait for ground control. His voice shook, doubt dripping from every syllable. The storm outside growled like an angry beast, the controls shuddering under Keisha's grip. She glanced briefly at James, her tone level, unflinching. "Sometimes, Lieutenant, following the rules gets people killed." The plane jolted violently downward, screams erupting from the cabin behind them. James clung to the dash, his eyes wide. His protest echoed in the chaos, a single line hanging like a guillotine in the storm. "This goes against every safety protocol." And with that, the impossible choice sharpened, whether to follow the book into disaster or follow the woman they still weren't sure they could trust. The cockpit shook like the inside of a drum, every gauge flashing red, every alarm demanding attention. The storm outside howled, lightning clawing at the sky as if determined to rip the plane from it. James Wilson's hands trembled over the radios, his voice nearly breaking. "Colonel, we can't do this without ground guidance. We need official instructions." Kesha's eyes were locked on the horizon, or what little of it could be seen through the sheets of rain. Her jaw tightened. "Then we'll get official guidance." She leaned closer, her tone clipped, commanding. "Switch to military emergency frequency. 121.5, now." James hesitated. "That's restricted. Civilian aircraft aren't allowed. Now, Lieutenant." Her voice snapped like thunder, brooking no argument. Something in her authority jolted him into action. His fingers scrambled across the dials, tuning the system. The static crackled, a low hum filling the cockpit until a voice broke through, clear and urgent. "Andrews Air Force Base, monitoring emergency frequency. Identify yourself." Kesha leaned into the mic, her voice steady. "This is Colonel Kesha Washington, United States Air Force. Call sign, Spectre. I am assuming command of a civilian Boeing 747. Captain incapacitated. Severe storm. Requesting immediate guidance." For a beat, silence. Then the line exploded with shock. "Spectre? Colonel Washington, is that really you? We thought you disappeared. The entire Air Force has been searching for your signal for 20 minutes. Command is mobilized. We thought you were gone." James's mouth fell open. The weight of the revelation pressed the air from the room. He looked at her differently now, not as a passenger, not even as a soldier, but as someone whose very name carried legend. The cockpit door was still half ajar, and the voice from the radio spilled into the cabin. Passengers froze mid-prayer, mid-scream, their eyes darting to each other. A hush fell as the words echoed, "Colonel Washington." Spectre, in row after row, jaws dropped. Someone whispered, "She's Spectre?" as if the name itself carried myth. An elderly veteran clutched his chest, eyes wide with recognition. "I've heard of her. She's the one who pulled a squadron through a sandstorm with no navigation. They said nobody else could have done it." Richard Blackwood stood frozen just inside the cockpit, his arrogance draining from his face. The color fled from his cheeks, leaving him pale and trembling. He tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat. The name Spectre rang louder than any protest he could make. The radio blared again, a new voice now, firm and authoritative. "Spectre, this is Commander Rodriguez, Air Operations. You are currently in the deadliest storm system recorded on the East Coast in decades. Winds exceeding 180 kilometers an hour. All airports closing. All airspace cleared. You are the only aircraft still in the sky." James's eyes darted to the instruments, disbelief twisting across his face. "The only one?" His voice cracked. "Yes," Rodriguez confirmed, his tone heavy. "Every other flight has been grounded or diverted. Civilian air traffic is suspended. The President himself has been briefed on your situation. You are priority 1. All resources are at your disposal." A murmur of shock rippled through the passengers as the words carried into the cabin. "The President?" A woman gasped. "She's the only one flying?" A man shook his head, awe dawning in his eyes. "That's not a passenger. That's a legend." Richard staggered backward, one hand gripping the doorframe. Moments ago, he had mocked her as unfit, dismissed her as invisible. Now the truth pressed down on him with humiliating force. He had insulted one of the most decorated pilots alive. His voice was barely a whisper. "No, this can't be." Kesha ignored him completely. Her focus never wavered. Andrews confirmed the nearest viable runway capable of handling a 747 in these conditions. "Spectre, Dover Air Force Base is being prepared." Runways cleared, emergency foam applied, medical units on standby. We will guide you, but conditions are deteriorating fast. You have less than 30 minutes. James swallowed hard, staring at Kesha. The reality of the situation hung over them like the storm itself. Deadly, vast, impossible. "Colonel," he said, his voice trembling, "even with your experience, this storm. No one has ever flown through something like this." Kesha's eyes flicked to him, calm as stone. "Then today will be the first." The plane jolted violently downward, oxygen masks swaying, passengers screaming again. But this time their fear carried a new undercurrent, hope tangled with awe. They had heard the name, felt the weight of it, and now they knew their fate was in the hands of Spectre. And as lightning tore across the sky outside, the cliffhanger sharpened like a blade. One woman, one storm, one impossible mission that no one had ever survived before. The cockpit groaned under the pressure, every rivet in the fuselage vibrating as the 747 pitched violently. Radar screens painted a wall of chaos, red bands of turbulence stacked like barricades, lightning flaring across the windshield. The storm wasn't just around them, it was swallowing them whole. James Wilson's knuckles were white on the dash, his voice rising above the alarms. "Colonel, this has never been done in a 747. The manuals don't even—" Kesha's tone cut through him like a steel edge. Calm, deliberate, unflinching. "Sometimes, Lieutenant, following the rules kills people. Breaking them at the right time saves lives." She began scribbling calculations on a notepad with one hand while her other steadied the controls, her eyes darting between gauges. Altitude, descent rate, torque, wind shear, all flashing through her mind faster than James could follow. She drew a spiral, her pencil carving tight circles. "We're not fighting this storm," she said. "We're dancing with it," James blinked. "Dancing?" Her eyes flicked to him, the faintest trace of a smile tugging her lips. A controlled spiral descent, through the eye. We let the storm pull us in, then ride it center down like a staircase. Fighter pilots use it in jets. Today, we'll use it in a giant metal bird. Lightning slammed into the wing, the cabin shrieking with terror as passengers screamed and clutched their seats. Oxygen masks swung violently, papers flew through the aisles. Children cried. A man shouted a prayer. The cockpit door burst open again. Richard Blackwood stormed in, soaked in sweat, his voice shrill. "This is madness. A spiral descent in this storm? She's going to kill us all. Listen to me." Kesha didn't even look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on the controls, her voice level and deadly calm. "Tourists don't belong in cockpits. Sit down or pass out. Those are your options." Richard froze, his words dying in his throat. For the first time he felt utterly irrelevant. The plane bucked hard, the nose dipping, alarms screaming louder. Kesha's hands moved like flowing water, smooth and decisive. "James, vertical speed. Monitor every second. I want updates on fuel pressure. Dr. Chun, hold the captain steady. We're about to pull G-forces." James's voice cracked. "Colonel, even if this works, passengers won't withstand the strain." Kesha didn't flinch. "Then tell them the truth." She flicked the intercom. Her voice, low and commanding, rolled through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Colonel Washington. In a few moments, we'll begin a maneuver never attempted in a commercial aircraft. You will feel G-forces. Hold on to your seats. Secure the children. This will be violent, but it will save your lives." A hush swept through the passengers. The fear didn't vanish, but something new gripped them. Trust. Even Richard's wife clutched the armrest, her eyes wet but steady, whispering, "Please, just let her do it." Outside, the storm snarled like a living thing. Lightning split the clouds in jagged forks, illuminating the aircraft's massive frame. Rain lashed the windows, each drop like a bullet. The radar blipped in frantic rhythm, warning of forces no plane was meant to endure. Kesha gripped the yoke tighter, every muscle in her body braced. She exhaled once, calm and absolute, the storm reflected in her eyes. "Prepare for G-forces," she said, her voice cutting into the silence. The world seemed to hold its breath. Hold on. And with that, she tilted the nose, committing 300 souls to a descent no textbook had ever dared to describe. The spiral descent tore through the storm like a blade cutting into chaos. 300 lives pressed against their restraints as the 747 dropped in controlled circles, lightning strobing across their terrified faces. The air screamed against the fuselage, the engines howled, but through it all, Kesha's hands were steady. She rode the storm like it was an old adversary, coaxing the beast instead of fighting it. Then, suddenly, the violence lessened. The wall of thunder and lightning gave way to a break in the storm's heart. Below, through a shifting hole in the clouds, the runway lights of Dover Air Force Base glowed like a beacon. Kesha exhaled, her voice even. Runway in sight. Flaps at 30. Speed steady. Brace for landing. James followed her commands with renewed confidence, his voice stronger now, almost reverent. Fuel pressure stable, gear down. Ready for final approach. The massive jet aligned with the runway, but the winds weren't done. A final crosscurrent slammed into the plane, tipping its nose. Gasps filled the cabin. Richard clutched the doorway, his arrogance gone, replaced by pale terror. Kesha leaned into the controls, her arms taut with precision. Easy, steady. The ground rushed up to meet them. Tires screeched against asphalt. The plane rattled, bounced, then kissed the runway with authority. A thunderous roar of applause erupted from the cabin, passengers sobbing with relief. The aircraft rolled to a stop as emergency vehicles swarmed. Ambulances, fire crews, soldiers in fatigues, everyone rushing toward the miracle that had just unfolded. Paramedics lifted Captain Mitchell onto a stretcher, Dr. Chun at his side, already relaying vitals. He's stable. She bought him the time he needed, the doctor told the medics, nodding toward Kesha. Kesha removed her headset, her expression calm as ever, though her chest rose and fell with controlled relief. For a moment, the cockpit was silent except for the hum of instruments. Then James spoke, his voice quiet, almost awed. "You did it. You actually did it." "No," Kesha corrected gently. "We did," word spread quickly. The passengers disembarking were greeted by floodlights, military personnel, and news cameras. The story traveled faster than the storm itself. An economy passenger, dismissed and doubted, had saved hundreds by performing an impossible maneuver. Weeks later, at the Pentagon, Kesha stood tall in dress uniform. The Secretary of Defense placed a star on her shoulder, announcing her promotion to Brigadier General, the youngest black woman in history to achieve the rank. Reporters filled the hall, snapping photos, their headlines already writing themselves. Spectre saves 312 lives in deadliest storm. Her spiral descent technique was officially documented and added to military training manuals. It was given a name, the Washington Maneuver. Future pilots would study her impossible landing as the gold standard of courage under fire. Meanwhile, Richard Blackwood's downfall was swift and merciless. Passengers' cell phone recordings of his arrogance, mocking Kesha, dismissing her as not first class, went viral within days. Tens of millions watched, outraged and appalled. His investment firm hemorrhaged clients, his reputation in tatters. At home, his wife packed her things. "I married a man who admired success," she told the court, "but discovered I'd been living with someone who confuses privilege with competence." She filed for divorce, gaining custody of their children. Richard's fortune evaporated. Bankruptcy followed. The man who once sneered at an economy passenger now rode the subway in second-hand suits, passing daily beneath a billboard in the city center. Kesha, Washington in uniform. Beneath the words, "Leadership has no color. It has character." The irony was brutal. Once he claimed she didn't belong in first class. Now, stripped of his wealth, family, and respect, he couldn't even keep his own life in order. For the passengers of Flight 231, the memory remained vivid. Some still woke at night hearing the storm, seeing the lightning, recalling the calm voice that cut through their fear. But, above all, they remembered the lesson Kesha had embodied. Never mistake appearance for ability. And as her story spread, inspiring millions, Kesha herself remained unchanged. Quiet, steady, a living reminder that true power doesn't ask for permission. It simply takes the controls and brings everyone home. Years passed. But the story of Flight 231 never faded. Newspapers still called it the impossible landing, and military cadets still studied the Washington maneuver as part of their training. For millions, it had become more than just a flight. It was proof that courage, not appearances, defined greatness. In the heart of the city, a massive billboard looked down over commuters every morning. It showed Brigadier General Kesha Washington in her uniform, her gaze steady, her presence unshakable. Beneath her image were the words, "Leadership has no color. It has character." Each day, Richard Blackwood walked past it. Once a man of first-class arrogance, now just another face in the crowd. He wore a wrinkled suit, carried a cheap briefcase, and rode public transportation like the ordinary people he had once mocked. Every time he glanced up at that billboard, regret carved deeper lines into his face. The memory of his humiliation, the words he had spat at Kesha in the storm, never stopped echoing in his head. Fate, however, had one last lesson for him. At an airport years later, Richard spotted her. Kesha was in full uniform, surrounded by aides and security. The air around her carried weight, the kind that comes only from true respect. He hesitated, his pride fractured, but finally forced himself forward. "General Washington," he said, voice low, trembling. I would like to apologize for what I said, for how I judged you. It was wrong. All of it." Kesha paused, studying him with calm eyes. She no longer saw the arrogant businessman from first class, only a man hollowed out by his own mistakes. Her voice was firm, but not cruel. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "your prejudice gave me the greatest gift possible, fuel. Every insult, every doubt, every dismissal, I turned them into reasons to keep proving people wrong. That's what kept me alive in war zones. That's what brought 312 people home that night. And that's what still drives me today." Richard lowered his gaze, shame heavy in his chest. He had lost his wealth, his family, his reputation, but standing before Kesha, he realized he had lost something even greater, the chance to ever be the kind of person others believed in. Kesha offered no further words. She turned, walking away with her team, her presence radiating the truth he could never escape. Success was not only the best revenge, it was the only revenge worth having. The closing narration rolled in like a steady heartbeat, carrying the lesson to every listener. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Never dismiss someone because of where they sit, how they look, or what you assume about them. Because sometimes the person you ignore in row 23C turns out to be the one who saves everyone. Success is the only revenge worth having. A final beat of silence before the call to action. Have you ever been underestimated by someone only to prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring real-life stories that remind us, greatness doesn't ask for permission to shine.